stand right here.
Yeah.
How are you?
Right.
All right, come on in close. Okay. Sure. We're going to just take a moment to silence the phone. My name is Jeff Anderson, and I am one of the attorneys, along with Cynthia LaFave, that has the honor and privilege of standing with courageous survivors here today and filing suit on behalf of courageous survivors, most of whom are anonymous, and who had and do now have the opportunity to take action, to file suit, to identify their offenders, to identify the institutions or the organizations that made choices to protect offenders, and thus to hold them accountable for what has been done, and at the same time gives survivors a chance for the first time in the state of New York and in this community to take action, not only to help the survivors who have been so grievously harmed, but to do something to protect other kids. And that is the Child Victims Act in New York is law. And that means every survivor that has been violated as a child by an adult can now do something that they couldn't before. And that is have their voice heard, take action to do something about recovery of their own power, and to do something to protect others in the future. For 37 years, I've been working with survivors of sexual abuse by clergy and other authority figures, and this is one of the brightest days and one of the most hopeful days I've ever had in this journey to share with survivors and the promise of a new day and a new way under the Child Victims Act. And one of the survivors who advocated among so many for this change in law that came so hard in New York is Brady Farrell. And so Brady, please step forward and introduce yourself. And before you do, as a survivor, Brady was one of those under the banner of New York Loves Kids, advocated in the legislature, stood against those that would not have this law changed. And it is no secret that the Catholic bishops and all of them, from Albany to New York to Rochester, Rochester to Buffalo, all organized a serious effort to push back this law. So tell us what this means to you, Brady, as a survivor and as an advocate, and the Child Victims Act now is real.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Brady Farrell. I'm CEO and co-founder of New York Loves Kids. I grew up in Saratoga Springs, so being in the Capital Region is certainly near and dear to my heart. Today is a day when finally so many survivors of child sexual abuse, like myself, who have previously been barred from the courts, of calling out both our abusers and any institutions that facilitated that abuse, today we finally can come forward. The law in New York allows survivors to come forward and provides a mechanism for us to continue down the path of healing and finding peace within ourselves. People forget that 1 out of 4 girls and 1 out of 6 boys are sexually abused by the time they're 18. This law is going to allow so many men and women within our communities to come forward and address the burden that they and we have been carrying for so long, and to really allow us to grow together and heal as a community. Here we are today calling out some specific individuals in the Roman Catholic Church. We will be clear that this is not at all an attack on Catholicism. This is anti-crime. And my abuse was within speed skating. I'd be the first to say that I would put my children in speed skating. These institutions build community and build wonderful things within our cities. What we need to do is have this law help the youth-serving organizations that help make the fabric of our community. So today is a huge day and really sheds light into dark corners of these institutions.
And thank you, Brady Farrell, for your advocacy, for your tenacity in sharing this day with us, and all the things that you did to help bring this law to bear across the state of New York. We have partnered, and our firm has partnered with Cynthia LaFave in this capital area. And Cynthia, step forward, because you have been practicing law with your firm here in this area. You know this area, and now have been working with us and working with the survivors of abuse by all kinds. And we have chosen to start with focusing on the Catholic bishops in New York, and in particular today here in Albany, the Diocese of Albany, and the practices. And tell us more about what we're doing and why we're doing this here today.
My name is Cynthia LaFave. I'm an attorney in Guilderland, New York, with the law firm of LaFave, Wein Frament. Several months ago, we were here because this law, the Child Victims Act, was passed in New York State. Today, I want to thank the legislature for doing what was long overdue, allowing these people who have now been named survivors because they needed to have the ability to come forward. Many of them have sat across from me in my office and told me things that they have never told anyone because they had no recourse. Now they see that this law gives them recourse. They see now that they can take a little bit of that power and bring it back to themselves. As children, they had no power. The priests and the institutions that hid the priests' actions are the cause of this press conference today, but it is not. It is the tip of the iceberg. I have sat with survivors in the last few months, dozens and dozens of survivors, and I have felt them be relieved of so much that they've held inside when they can finally talk about it and finally realize that there is some hope for recourse in this state. And it is time for them to come forward because they understand, they completely understand that what they are doing is not only going to change their lives, it will change the children who are alive today's lives, but it will also change the lives of children in generations to come, because we need to protect the children, and this is the step that needed to be taken for that to happen.
Cynthia LaFave, today, first we want to express gratitude to all the survivors who have shared their secret with us. We are pledged to make sure no further harm is done and to protect the privacy of every survivor that has brought action, that chooses to not have his or her name used, and so we've designated them as does or under anonymous pleadings. And that's what every survivor needs to know. But today, we also want folks and survivors to know that because of the new law, and because survivors have a chance to come forward and we have, as of this morning, against the Diocese of Albany, filed 19 cases. We have,
Jeff, I want you to know that there are many more to come. The 19 are the ones that were filed. There are many more than the 19 to come. We are processing a lot of things in our office and in Jeff Anderson's office, to whom I owe a huge debt of gratitude for allowing us to partner with him on this. But at this point, there are 19 filed. There will be many more filed in the days and weeks to come. The one-year window is open, and we will use every day of that year.
and today and every day for the next 364 days in which this law applies, great hope and promise. To date, 19 cases have been filed against the Diocese of Albany. In those files, there are actually 8 new names of offenders, perpetrators, whose names had not been identified before. And they appear here in red. There's a total of 13 perpetrators named in the suits filed today. It's also worth noting that suits have also been filed, and we've brought suit in Syracuse against the Diocese of Syracuse and the Diocese of Ogdensburg, and across the state in connection with Cynthia and her firm and other firms across this state. The Child Victims Act has allowed us to bring suit and file claims across the state of New York against the Catholic bishops. 262 cases were filed across the state of New York against the Catholic diocese, and every single one of them. And it is today that gives us such great hope and promise that the courage of the survivors and the voices that never were allowed to be heard or acknowledged are now given. And it is that great hope and promise, armed with the courage of the survivors that have shared that secret, that now gives us and gives survivors the chance to protect other kids, to identify those that have done harm to them. And so Mark Lyman stands with us here today as a survivor. Jean Marin stands with us as a survivor. Brady Farrell stands with us as a survivor. And they are the ones whose name they have chosen to use and be public. But what survivors need to know, under this act, they are allowed to come forward anonymously and never have to stand before a microphone. But we are there to stand with them for their truth. And I'll give them a chance to be believed and heard and take action in a way never allowed before in the state of New York. So, Jean Marin, please step forward and tell us what this means to you today as a survivor.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Jean Marin, and I grew up down the road a bit in Colony, New York. And I attended Notre Dame Bishop Gibbons High School, which is on the list here, and was sexually assaulted, raped, and exploited via pornography by this man who at the time went by Brother James Vincent Haney. He abused me for 5 academic years. And that's a long time. That's a lot of trauma to experience. I never thought I'd be here today. Along with Brady, I did some activism for this law, and I never thought it would come to fruition during my lifetime. So I am also hopeful and very grateful for it. But I think gratitude is the thing I was struck with most this morning. And when I become grateful, I get emotional, so I apologize ahead of time. I'm grateful for all those who participated or supported this bill going through, especially the survivors, especially my fellow survivor activists, and also the amazing legislators who served as ambassadors to protecting kids in the past and in the present, because it's been over a decade of fighting for this. I've been involved for the last 7 years, but they've been doing it longer. But I'm also grateful to my gratitude today. Interestingly, I found this morning that my gratitude today also goes out to the doubters, the skeptics, the apologists, the deniers, and yes, even the protectors. It was they who supplied some pretty strong resistance to New York's Child Victims Act, a resistance toward protecting kids, resistance toward healing trauma. Some used their vast resources to suppress us, to suppress our voices, to quiet us, to silence us. They lobbed strong propaganda campaigns our way. And they implemented bad policies, basically, and used poor playbooks. And they got away with it for a very, very long time. It worked for them. In my mind, they utilized, humanity-defying and denying techniques. They released incomplete data. Okay, when we start to talk about the actual archdiocese, thank you, Albany and New York, you released incomplete data because my data wasn't in there. They refused to take reports. They strong-armed connections and perhaps even contracts to keep this law from going through for years, for over a decade. And that was all in the service of denying child sexual assault survivors their due access to justice, accountability, and redress. And that was also their intent, was to further demean us. Okay, part of that action was to further demean survivors so that we would go away, either as an individual or as a collective voice, but we didn't. And all with that, the ramification was that they thoroughly failed kids today and kids tomorrow because they failed for decades to stop it, or at least reduce it, to protect kids. And I think that's what made me rise finally. This is a public health and public safety issue that has to be eliminated, and today we're taking a first step in New York forward. Typically my attitudes and feelings are different toward protectors, but this morning I did realize that I owe them and their supporters, whether they be active or passive, much gratitude as well, because it was them that when they did their egregious pushback against us, that child sex assault survivors rose. It was they that led one by one for us to come out and say, me too, to choose a new life, to choose to discard those false myths that they were saying about us out there, to choose to discard the suppression and the silence, to choose to discard the continued negligence that they were operating under. And in that suppression of our voices and of many voices in New York State, they also suppressed our existence in data, and again, that goes back to the Archdiocese. But what they didn't realize was they were putting us in a position that we knew too well. They put us back in a really familiar place. They put us in a metaphorical chokehold. And we knew that position. And we rose, but we're not little kids anymore. And so, for those of us that did live through it, that hasn't to this day completely given up by a full flight in the fight, flight, or freeze domain, and those that aren't still frozen, we started fighting and we rose. We came to terms with it. We said we got to do something. We got to do something for ourselves. We deserve justice, accountability, and redress. We deserve to be counted. We deserve to be recognized. And kids need to be protected. There's no better thing that we can do. There's no better thing I can do before I leave this earth than to get this law and everything about the rape culture to begin with, but especially of kids, eliminated. So I think everybody who's played a part in that, and I hope that we go even further someday.
Jean Marin, we thank you and every survivor. And first, there are so many survivors who no longer are with us that we need to both acknowledge the sorrow of what has been and the past that was, but live in the present, knowing that today we stand on the shoulders of so many survivors. A few stand with us today, but on the shoulders of so many that have gone before. And when Jean Marin talks about how she rises today, and at one time was in the hands of Brother James Vincent Haney, she was a lamb. But today, she and the other survivors are now allowed to rise as lions. And that's the way I see you and every single survivor that shares this secret and this journey with us. Lions, roaring for truth, demanding accountability and justice. And it is a day of great hope and promise. And yes, there is work that lies ahead, and we will toil together. Mark Lyman you came to us about 10, was that 10 years ago? Please step forward, identify yourself, because around 10 years ago, Mark Lyman came forward, shared his secret with us, and at that time, the diocese and the religious order that were involved and Genevieve, the offender, were able to hide behind and shield accountability because of the statute of limitations. And today you stand with us knowing that statute of limitations is no longer an impediment. How does it make you feel today?
My name is Mark Lyman. I am a survivor. I am an advocate. This has been a long journey. It's not been easy, but today begins the first day of empowerment for many sexual abuse victims around New York State. There are secrets that don't have to be hidden. There are predators that can now be exposed, and we have the tools to make that happen. My gratitude goes out to the legislators who, after realizing the tremendous issue of sexual abuse and sexual exploitation of children, must be on our forefront. I thank Jeff Anderson and associates and my fellow survivors, because today is a new day. Empowerment is real, starting now. You don't have to come forward publicly, but you can drop that baggage. If you were abused as a child, it was not your fault, and you can do something about it starting today. And so today's a very historic day for us, and I think going forward, I think we're going to be able to have a profound impact on the safety and well-being of kids here in New York State. We've waited for this for so long, and I just can't begin to explain the emotion that we feel, because for many years we weren't sure we would get this far. So thank you.
Mark, thank you. Thank you, man. It is time, and I think our hearts are all filled with gratitude to the survivors that have already come forward, and those that we know can now, as Jane Does and John Does, and some of whom stand with us here today. Because it's time for the truth to be known. To give survivors the chance in New York to reclaim the power that they did not have as kids. So it's a time for reclamation of power and the recovery of it. For that voice to be heard, to that truth to be known. And then to invite all those that have pushed against this law, which includes the Catholic bishops, who lobbied so hard and so long against it, to become a part of this hopeful journey, to become a part of reconciliation and reclamation. And before there can be accountability, before there can be peace, there has to be justice. And part of this justice is the excavation of all the names of all the offenders known to the Catholic bishops across the state, including here in Albany. We released a list earlier this month and this year of 83 names that had not been named before. We know there are more. So we invite the bishop. And we know that the representatives to the bishop have already sent the signals to be willing to work with instead of against. And I think that's a really positive sign. Haven't you seen that, Cynthia?
I have.
And I really see a sea change here underway. And it's because the survivors now have voice and they now have opportunity to be heard. And those who have chosen to protect offenders and themselves now have no choice, because they can be held accountable and they cannot hide behind artificial laws called statutes of limitations any longer. So it is a day of great promise, great hope, born of great sorrow and pain in the past and great courage. So thank you to all the survivors. Thank you to all the supporters of all the survivors and to the advocates. Brady Farrell, what say you? Step forward.
There's 262 cases that were filed in Albany, or in New York State by Jeff Anderson and Associates. That's not 250 cases or piles of paper. That is 250 human beings. That is 262 children. How many people were in your graduating class? How does that compare to 262? Okay? That's day one. And for 14 years, New York State has said, you don't matter. But Assemblywoman Marge Markey started this bill, and she kept pushing this bill right up until it crossed the line. And we're here today telling everyone who might be able to relate to our stories, pick up the phone and call. For once, you don't have to Google to see if you were sexually abused or if you were molested and try and self-justify this. Call people that are here and willing and able and qualified to help you. We're here. It's time. It is time for people to shed our weight and our baggage and our secrets. It's not our problem anymore. So I encourage anyone to come forward. And I'm not saying stand in front of a microphone. I'm saying be honest with yourself and reach out to the resources in our communities to help people grow and to heal. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused by the time they're 18. When's that going to change? Today. It's going to change today. And to all our brothers and sisters survivors out there, we are here to help you. You are not alone.
Thank you, Brady Farrell. Cynthia, any further comments?
I think that what we are doing here today is helping people that are coming forward as survivors, and we're also helping the people who are so far unable to come forward. And what we're doing is changing the entire community in allowing these claims to be brought forward and to be heard. And we're taking back the power that was taken from these children, and we're giving it back to them as adults, but we're changing things for the children alive today and the children in the future.
And our teams here, our legal teams and the advocates working with us, we are starting today in the filing of these cases here in Albany and across the state. And yes, we named the Catholic bishops across the state. And yes, the numbers that we posted here, filings of 262, are identifying the Catholic bishops because they are first in line of a long number of institutions and offenders that have to be exposed and that will be through this. And so this is just the beginning of this journey of both excavation and exposure of the risks in the communities that are present and past. So the Boy Scouts of America and other institutions are yet to be filed, but we knew we needed to go first with all those stories that we had heard of all those survivors who had never had an opportunity to take action beyond sharing those secrets with us. And so most of the survivors who filed cases today in the capital area here and across the state are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and some in their 70s. And why is it, when I got the question this morning, are they of that age? And the reason is that so many survivors in New York were never given a chance to be believed. They had to carry the secret in silence and in fear, believing like Haney, coercing silence and fear and intimidation, or Genevieve, and the survivors not having a place to go or be believed, and thus suffering in silence. And so the kids today who are at risk are going to be less so, but also less likely to disclose. And what this Child Victims Act does is give the survivors who have been abused decades before the chance to protect other kids. Because in the final analysis, all we really want to do is have the truth known about what has been, give the survivors a chance to have a better life and recover their power. And in the final analysis, what every single survivor that stands with us and that has worked with us for the last 37 years is to do something to protect other kids. Bottom line. Bottom line. Right, Jean Marin?
Yes.
Right, Mark Lyman?
Absolutely.
Right, Brady Farrell?
Hell yes.
Hell yes. Thank you to the survivors. It is a new day. There is hope. And there is work to be done. And there's also deep gratitude. Deep gratitude to all those that have spoken and that have shared and that have cared and that have dared to be bold and to come forward with that painful secret. Thank you all. Questions? Yes, sir.
I know you mentioned the aggregate numbers here in Albany aren't changing. Your cases included in those numbers?
Yes.
Yes. In Albany, Cynthia and her firm have joined with us to file all of 19 of these cases. Actually, the number's 20. And we also, together, have joined in partnership and filed 6 in Syracuse. And we've also filed 14 in Ogdensburg against the Diocese of Ogdensburg. And we have teamed together on behalf of survivors in each of those cases and each of those jurisdictions. And in each of those jurisdictions and those filings, we've also named new names of offenders that have never before been revealed. And so we go from here to Syracuse to share this journey and to reach survivors, to let them know there is hope, there is promise, there is a way, there is now a path. So thank you all. Brady?
What are you looking for as a resolution of these cases? Take the trial and hope you'll settle with the church, or what?
The question is what are we looking for? We're looking for the opportunity that is now given in the law for the truth to be known that has never before been revealed. To vanquish the secrets. We're looking for the opportunity for the survivors to reclaim and recover the power they did not have as kids, that they now can reclaim and have and exercise as adults. And that's recovery of power. This is not about sex, it's about power and the abuse of it. We're looking for the opportunity to share the journey with each survivor that wants so much to not have other kids get hurt the way they were. And that means protect kids. That's what we want. That's why we're here. That's why we've assembled. And that's what the Child Victims Act in New York can accomplish.
The perpetrators need to be sued. Are there any in active ministry roles? And do you have figures on how many are still living versus how many are deceased?
The question is are there any perpetrators in ministry that we're aware of that are subject to these suits? And the answer is not that we're aware of. But as soon as we become aware of it, we report to law enforcement, and we also make that known publicly, the same way we are doing this today. So the answer is not that we know of, and when we do, we identify them. In New York, we were there this morning in the city, and we identified offenders that were in ministry. Here in Albany, Ogdensburg, and Syracuse, right now, we do not know of any in ministry, and if we did, we would be reporting it both to the diocese and to law enforcement and to the public and warning them. So that's what we do, and that's what we can tell you today. Many are deceased. More are alive than deceased. I don't have the exact numbers. We know that Haney's not deceased.
Right, he's alive, but we don't know where he is.
Haney,
One
for
of the issues of the way the system's been set up and not been held accountable is
yeah.
that's one of the issues, because please don't think that because some of these cases are old that the people are dead or have stopped. Serial predators don't stop. My guy went after males and females proficiently, and he's highly skilled. They just get better at doing it. And he's still alive, but he's fled. We don't know where he is. He's fled his initial ministry. He could be in one. We don't know. So as Jeff said, if we find out where and what he's doing, then we can do something. Last we knew, he was supposedly in the Philippines.
And we track these offenders. We track Haney. Gene Marin has tracked Haney. We've tracked Haney. We know he was a member of a religious order and assigned in the Diocese of Albany, and there we know he not only violated, raped, and abused Gene Marin as a child, we also know there were others who we now represent, and we also know his last location was the Philippines. The Philippines. And so we track them, we follow them, and we identify them when we can and how we can. And now we have a chance to do more than we've ever been able to do before. So the journey begins today, and it continues on the shoulders and of the so many survivors that are now have this chance to come forward. So,
Can I say something?
yeah.
What your question is you're saying, why are we bringing up such old things? But let me answer that question, even if it's not your question, because I have been told that by other people. Why are you digging into old things? But it's not old. It lives inside of every survivor, and what this law has done and what's happening now is we're allowing this to come out of the survivors. So finally they can walk free, or at least a little free of it.
Thank you all. Thank you, Cynthia.
Sunlight is the what? Best disinfectant.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right. Mark, you got it. Brady, can I give you a hug? Okay, thank you. Mark, can I give you a hug, man?
Yeah.
Thank you.